Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. And, that we hear sometimes the modern world has lost a sense of sin and all that. And we on this show have to talk about serious issues like mortal sin sometimes. And so we get questions about sin. So we thought, let's just do a show about sin, about mortal sin, about the consequences of mortal sin, about the message of joy. I mean, really, there's no point in talking about it all if you're not going to talk about the fact that God has made a path. He has opened a way that we can avoid all these things. And even if we have not avoided them, we can come to his mercy constantly over and over and over again. So it's a joyful thing to talk about. So we thought we'd talk about sin. We said, who are we going to get to talk about sin? Let's get an expert on sin, somebody who really is a top-notch, world-class expert in sin. Tom Nash, thanks for being here with us.
Hopefully I can do. You mean that from the abstract?
Oh, I meant from your studies. Did I make it sound otherwise, Tom? Did I make that? I apologize if that came off the wrong way.
No. Just
as a theologian,
just to clarify for the audience. God help me. People are going home. No, good choice.
Yeah, right. But in a certain way, we're all experts in sin, if we're honest. I mean,
this is, I think, too, where Bishop Sheen, Venerable Sheen, and
soon to be blessed
Sheen, yes, he talks about who knows better sin, the person who has wrestled with it or has given into it blindly. And if you wrestle with it or you resist it, and this is, of course, too,
he's so good. They should do something with his works. I mean, that guy should be promoted. He is so good.
He is, and it's similar to our friend St. Ignatius of Loyola, the great spiritual direction that came from a lot of trial.
Yeah.
Not listening to the whole thing of desolation and the good spirit and the bad spirit. And the bad spirit is always one who's going to promote agitation, despair, et cetera. So,
all right. So I
never make a major decision in turmoil.
That's one of Ignatius's things. Yeah. So after that, I stopped making decisions altogether. I was like,
stop it.
I'm a mess. No time for me to make a decision. So we're going to get into get into the details of what constitutes mortal sin. Are there particular mortal sins that are particularly dangerous? All of that stuff. So we'll do the negative side for a positive reason, though, because forewarned is forearmed, as they say. And also it allows a constant conversation about the mercy of God, which is at the root of all of this. I was telling you, Tom, I've been watching videos about before we went on the air, I was telling you this. I've been watching videos about for some reason they've been coming into my feed, the visions of St. Bridget of Sweden. And they're making me want to be a better person because they're like visions of hell and purgatory. And holy smokes.
As we say, imperfect contrition is better than no contrition at all, because it's sufficient for forgiveness, absolution, and it's like doing the right thing for not the best reason, not out of love of God, but because I don't want to go to hell.
Well, if I had to say one thing that it seems like Bridget of Sweden and a lot of these mystics who have visions of hell and judgment and all that, like Padre Pio and others, it seems to me that the core of what they're always saying is, this is urgent, do it now. Like, it always seems to me like at the core of the message, you might get elaborate visions and sometimes terrifying visions and all that, but all of it always comes back to them saying, take care of this now, don't wait.
Yeah.
And that seems to me like the core of the spiritual impetus of the whole thing.
And I think it's a reminder, too, that God lets us have, people talk about God being mean. It's like, well, no, God loves us and oftentimes punishes us by letting us have our own way, to realize that we are not the way, the truth, and life, that he is, and that these choices where we look for substitutes, which is, idolatry, as we'll talk about, comes in various shapes and sizes. As St. Augustine said, a man has as many masters as he has vices.
Right.
Wow. Sin is a reminder of one person once said that pain is to the body, guilt is to the soul what pain is to the body. It's a sign that there's a problem.
I have to say, Tom, this is a shocking thing to say to some modern people. You're not God. you're not the way. Like, I think people think it's in your heart, or it's in the way. It's if I just get discovering my true self or something. And the fact is, how about this? Discover Jesus' true self. That would be a way.
Well, if we recognize that we're made in his image and likeness, and I think a lot of people, we're old enough to remember how as long as you respect each other, as long as there's consent, but this is not a good basis for an ethic. And of course, we can blur the lines with rationalization of what constitutes consent and
Right.
what constitutes respect.
But we've made ourselves the center of the moral universe.
Precisely.
Yeah, and that's what I think these
we-
reminders about sin are like. You are not the center of the moral universe. You are a tiny little creature, and it's not a matter of. Well, let me ask you this:
Yes.
Is mortal sin just a matter of breaking the rules?
No, it's breaking a relationship with God, whose image we are made, image and likeness. We are made in his image and likeness. And so it's not breaking of rules, because they often say that rules without relationship leads to rebellion, and people need to know Christ, and they also need to realize that these things that they do that we call sin, transgressions, are not only an offense against God, but offense against themselves and all whom they interact with. Some people think that if they change the person they're going out with, well, if you don't change yourself, you're going to repeat the same mistakes, transgressions in future relationships, right? And, surprise, surprise, what happens in Vegas doesn't stay in Vegas. It goes with you because it shapes your character, which influences how you think and your interior life and how you interact with people.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about mortal sin. Then, if you could you just define it and tell me how I might, what would be required for me to be in a state of mortal sin? What is it, and how do I get into it? And then we'll talk about the particulars of particular mortal sins, groups of mortal sins, all of that,
Yeah.
and then how to get out of them. I think this will make for an interesting conversation, Tom, actually, because a lot of people have a vague sense
Yes.
that the church has, but they don't know that the church's actual teaching on sin.
Well, we go right to the Catechism. In Catechism 1855, it says, "Mortal sin destroys charity in the heart of man by a grave violation of God's law. It turns man away from God, who is his ultimate end and beatitude, by preferring an inferior good to him." So I mentioned about different shapes and sizes. An inferior good, it could be some vice, right?
Yeah.
People can get all caught up. I mean, their life, their job, their hobby, it could become, various things can become obsessions or consuming. So do you prefer someone, where it's like, well, this is so much I'm going to not even go to Mass on Sunday.
Yeah.
They can get that kind of a craziness. Now, there's three components to mortal sin that they must be met together. Mortal sin is a sin whose object is grave matter and which is also committed with full knowledge and deliberate consent. This is 1857. Grave matter specified by the Ten Commandments refers to what Jesus says to the rich young man in Matthew 19, do not kill, do not commit adultery, et cetera, et cetera. So there we, by the way, point out that there is such a thing as mortal sin. It's not once saved, always saved. This is a reminder, as St. Paul says in Galatians 5, 19 to 21, verses 19 to 21, and also in 1 Corinthians 6, that there are certain actions, choices, acts of the will that can exclude us and will exclude us if we commit them with full consent and complete knowledge, that we're truly guilty of them in the grave sense of the word, that it's not just a once saved, always saved, that there are things we can do, but yet God is there, mercy. Because otherwise, why does Jesus say, if you forgive men's sins in John 20, 21 to 23, he gives them the Holy Spirit. If you forgive men's sins, they are forgiven. If you retain them, they are retained. Clearly, he gives the power to forgive sins only to a few, and it's just a reminder that it's not, this relationship is not one and done. It's not a momentary reality like any other relationship, all the more so with God. It is an ongoing reality, and we can turn away, just like we can do things to cost our jobs or get us in trouble with a spouse, so too with God. And so anyway, we mentioned grave matter. Mortal sin requires full knowledge and complete consent. It presupposes knowledge of the sinful character of the act, of its opposition to God's law. It also implies this is in 1858, 1859. It also implies a consent sufficiently deliberate to be a personal choice. Feigned ignorance and hardness of heart do not diminish, but rather increase the voluntary character of a sin. Somebody trying to pretend that they don't know, but they do know. So in that regard, I would point out to people, hey, this is a possibility. I think when we speak about the law of God written on our hearts, Romans chapter 2, verses 13 to 16, that's all of us made in God's image and likeness, so we all have a conscience. And particularly with the moral law, we know that basic right and wrong. It's written on our heart. Now, if someone maybe having difficulty, the Trinity or the Assumption, I think matters of faith become more challenging because it's not simply the law of God written on our heart. It's not the right and wrong that we know.
Yeah.
And this isn't an excuse somebody necessarily because of what do we say about he who does not come into the church or remain in the church knowing that Christ is made necessary for salvation, is rejecting Christ on his terms at Catechism 840, 68, 48, speaking of a mortal sin. And therefore, that person cannot be saved. But we have fewer excuses about the moral law than we do about, dogmatic issues.
And that would go to if you said there's three elements, one, it's got to be grave matter, you got to have full knowledge, and then consent of the will.
Yes.
That would go to full knowledge. There's many people, it's harder to have full knowledge of matters of faith than it is of matters of the natural law.
Especially given people's background, and the natural moral law given exactly right, the law of God written on our heart.
I think we should get into some specifics about mortal sin. And we'll break them into categories. We'll talk about sins against God, sins against others. We'll get into particularly sexual sins. I know people are very interested in those.
Yeah, sadly,
and then sins of the interior life, sins of the heart.
Yeah, and people will say, oh, sexual sins, those aren't the worst. Well, they may not be the worst necessarily, but they seem to be the most popular. There's something. Shall we say the mortal sin of choice?
Yeah, but also to say that's not the worst is a certain. I mean, do you want to really say to the Lord who died on the cross for you, well, I mean, I didn't give you my best, but I didn't give you my worst either.
Yeah,
I mean,
and it's also it's like, well, the bottom line is these can all be mortal sins, and that's. The real issue is these are sins that hurt us and hurt each other, and they alienate us from God first and foremost. So,
and every sin is a failure to give to someone what is actually due to them. Mm-hmm. And so you
beginning with God.
Yeah, most importantly God, but adultery is a failure, not just.
And it multiplies it.
Yeah, right. It's a failure to give your children what they deserve, to give your spouse what your spouse deserves, to give God what God. Like, you're letting a lot of people down when you're committing mortal sin, and that I think we don't talk about. So let's, kind of emboldened by the knowledge, especially in the Easter season, of the mercy of God, we can just talk openly about mortal sin and its consequences, but always with the idea that the path of mercy is very easy to access. They've got one right in your neighborhood, probably. It's called the Catholic Church. We'll be right back with more. Tom Nash on mortal sin on Catholic Answers Live.
Catch Catholic Answers Live anytime at Catholic.com.
Homeschool Connections, an online provider of courses for your Catholic homeschool and your homeschool co-op, is a sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. Homeschool Connections website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
check out EWTN's official YouTube channel.
Just follow the link on our homepage at EWTN.com or go to YouTube.com/EWTN.
Watch EWTN's live shows or today's homily from the Daily Mass.
Click the upload button to see our most recent clips.
You can also find all of EWTN YouTube content by clicking the playlist button.
It's all on the official EWTN YouTube channel at YouTube.com/EWTN.
Visit today.
All right, welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Forewarned is forearmed. And I see there's a note here. We're talking about mortal sin with Tom Nash. And I said Tom's an expert. I meant in the abstract, and that he's studied these things as a theologian. But you have a note here that I shouldn't forget to say that something about pride first. So why did you want to talk about pride before we got into the specific sins?
Well, pride is the worst of sins. However, it played out with Christ and the devil, with God in creating the angels, that he chose. People have different theories that he chose. He didn't want to serve man. He couldn't think of, whether it was the incarnation, man being an inferior nature, and that man being raised up and have. There are various reasons, or basically, the devil's I will not serve, non serviam.
Yeah.
And we see him tempting Adam and Eve in the garden in Genesis 3. Pride is the worst, and I dare say, people say, oh, there's these lesser sins, but I don't believe you can honestly come up with any of the other seven deadly sins without having pride as a component of them. For example, the greed, avarice or greed, I want this, I deserve it, or lust, hey, I deserve him or her, etc. That there's always an element of pride, my will be done, not thy will be done, and not breaking trust with God, as Adam and Eve did at the encouragement of the devil. So yeah, pride is the worst of all the sins. It will it'll take you out as it did the devil. And his
that makes
minions.
me think then you should just work on being humble then.
Humility is important, and I remember with Saint Jose Maria Escriva of Opus Dei, who founded Opus Dei, one of his confreres said that humility is the most important virtue, and then he goes, no. He came back and he went at length about how love is. But I would add that I think we are much more likely to, if we get humility right, love will follow, because we as fallen human persons are much more likely to rationalize and with the passions to have clouded judgment and rationalizations about what constitutes love. But if we get humility right, everything follows. So I think in that sense, humility is foundational to the faith life in general, and getting love right in particular.
All right, so let's start with some. And by the way, I said it's Easter season, and the Easter season has concluded. So I just have Easter in my heart, Tom.
Well, know what? We always celebrate the Lord's resurrection, even though even when we're thinking about Holy Week, for example, which is some months behind us, that we remind ourselves that this is going to end well. It's a reminder of what our Lord did for us. So amidst the sorrow, there is great hope, and realizing what Christ has done. So yeah, every Sunday is a little Easter, and every time we celebrate the Mass, we are celebrating the Paschal mystery, death, passion, death, resurrection, ascension in heaven. So.
All right, so let's. Thank you for saving me from my own faux pas. Then you gave this. That was. Are you a Jesuit by any chance? Like, I said it's the Easter season, and then you were like, let me explain why it's always the Easter season. Okay, though, that saved me from the fact that I just made a mistake. No, you saved me from all that.
If I were a religious, I'd probably pick the Jesuits for various reasons over the Dominicans. Not that either one would want me, but
I don't want to. I don't want to know why you've. You didn't even.
I like their soteriology.
But it's both of them are intellectual orders.
Yeah.
And so but I can tell just the fact that you only mentioned those two suggests to me that the intellectual.
Although I think Franciscans I'm attracted to, and I think if there were Catholic quiz bowl, the Franciscans would do well, because you've got you've got Saint Anthony, who is very scripture scholar. You've got Bonaventure, who's a bright guy. Duns Scotus, and then you also got Francis, who's you got that infused knowledge going on. I think he'd do
Wonderful Francis.
I think they could hang in Catholic Jeopardy. The
Well, I would just like
Benedictines
to
would
say
hang
this,
there too.
just in case Pope Leo is listening. If I were to become a religious, I would become an Augustinian. What do you think, Pope Leo? I'm just.
Saint
I think he,
Augustine,
likes me better than you now. All right, let's go to sins. We'll talk about sins. Is it possible to sin directly against God? Are all sins kind of indirect? They offend God because they use other people, or they misuse ourselves or creation or something? Or is it possible to sin directly against God?
You can directly sin against God. Different things can happen. Idolatry, as I mentioned, that can come in various shapes and sizes. We oftentimes think of the pagans, the ancient pagans, as being idolaters.
Do you know why we think of them that way?
Well, because they worship false gods. Now we can
Yeah,
also
that's why.
and even some of them.
We don't just think of them as that way.
Well,
they were in fact.
Yes,
committing
there can
idolatry.
be people who are seeking God sincerely, like in Acts 17 at the Areopagus, right?
Sure.
That could
that's right.
But so we affirm the good wherever we can.
That's a good point.
But there is that. I mean, false gods, human sacrifices, whether it was to Moloch back in the day or the Aztecs more recently, or God have mercy on ourselves, how the secular sacrament of abortion in our own time, this is a grave sin. Not the only sin, but it is a grave sin. So yes, we can do this in blasphemy, where we invoke God.
Wait, can we go back to idolatry? Don't just blow through these. Idolatry. I think a lot of people think this one's over. This is an old-timey one. But a couple things. One, I've been reading about how in Scandinavian countries, they're actually going back to worshiping Thor and Odin and all of that, going out into the forest and worshiping the gods of the forest. And then, are there other forms of idolatry? So we're talking about sins against God. Let's get them. Let's
blasphemy.
Let's dig in. No, I'm saying don't move on to blasphemy. I want you to tell me about idolatry. That's specifically what I'm saying right now.
Okay, all right. Well.
so what? Like, how might I, as a Catholic, commit idolatry? What might be idolatrous?
Well,
in my life, I'm not going to go into the forest.
Hypothetically,
and worship
our
Odin.
vices can become idols. Sports, for example.
Oh yeah.
A love of sports, a hobby, different vices potentially. People talk about addictions, but drugs, alcohol, whatnot.
So the love that should be directed towards God is directed towards.
We're going to get into it too with other things later on in our discussion, but oftentimes of a sexual nature, pornography, where we exalt ourselves and our own wants and our own desires and our own fulfillment over and against God, as opposed to in an ordered way. So I think we fail to recognize that. Well, I'm not like these people who did sacrifice children back in the day.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Is I think we can idolatry. That's an old thing. I don't have that one.
But idols, as I said earlier, a man has as many masters as he has vices, as Saint Augustine says. Yeah. Pope Leo XIV.
Yeah.
So I have first reference.
Oh, you're trying to get in on my friendship with Pope Leo XIV now? I was building the bridges of friendship by mentioning the Augustine.
I invoked Augustine.
I think he likes me better than you. All right,
Fair.
now, Tom.
Let
us move on to blasphemy. All right, what? Okay, I'm going to. A lot of people used the word blasphemy recently when Donald Trump tweeted a depiction of himself as Jesus.
Yeah, and
he said later that he was a doctor or something.
Yeah.
But is that blasphemy? Was that blasphemous?
Well, prescinding from the particular case in that controversy.
Oh, you don't want to get in. Okay.
Well, I don't think at this point. But yeah, when we try to approximate ourselves, it's one thing to be an emissary of God. It's another thing to, put attention on oneself as if he or she were God. But I think blasphemy. I mean, we see blasphemy coming in a different way. Strictly speaking, for example, the Ten Commandments, what made, not to take lightly irreverent language regarding God's name, but what made that a grave offense historically was invoking God's name to give strength to a falsehood. That would be, gravely wrong to misuse God's name in that sense. It can also be a profanation, God forbid, of the Blessed Sacrament.
Oh, yeah.
That
Right,
is
people do that.
When we talk about liturgical abuses, it doesn't get worse than that. So, things of that nature, trampling, desecration of a cross. I mean, we think of the Black Mass, God have mercy and lead to repentance, saintness, where they...
One thing that you've made clear to me, and this is in my friendship with you, I think you've, we're supposed to sharpen one another. I think you've sharpened me in this way, Tom.
Okay.
The use of the name of Jesus Christ. You talk about how, like, if somebody uses that name profanely, you might make the sign of the cross, or you might say, "Praise be His name," because you said that. I was watching a movie the other day. It wasn't a bad movie. There was nothing wrong with the movie, except for someone used the name of Jesus Christ in a very profane way in the movie. So I hit pause, and I prayed a little prayer of reparation.
Praise
I
God.
learned that from you.
Praise
but
God.
that is blasphemy. We have a lot of profaning the name of Jesus in our society. Tom Nash here. He's walking us through all the sins he's committed. All the sins, all the mortal sins. Right back with more. We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Throughout history, some Catholics have been among the worst kind of villains, right? Or were they? In Cancelled, historian Steve Weidenkopf digs into the lives and controversies of some of these Catholics whose reputations have been blackened, often unfairly. He takes on the anti-Catholic versions of history and defends not only these figures, but the faith they represent. Order your copy of Cancelled today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore. Tom Nash gets the groovy music? I had no idea. Tom, have you been here for the groovy music before?
I think so.
Have you?
By the way, I understand that our president's son performed that groovy music.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nathaniel?
Nick Check and the Dead Century.
Oh.
That's the name of their band.
No.
The Dead Century, yeah.
The Dead Century.
Why are you laughing at the name of their band? What's the name of your band?
I don't have one.
All right, we're talking about mortal sins. We're actually doing something we have not done before, and we're trying to be helpful in this regard. Say what the church says about sin. And so we're on the category of sins directly against God. We talked about idolatry, which, as Tom was pointing out, comes in many shapes and sizes. Blasphemy, which I think has become kind of commonplace in our society. We don't have respect for the name of God, for the name of the person of Jesus Christ, for holy things. But here's one I think some people really don't like this one. I don't think they're going to like you and me for mentioning this as a sin against God. Missing Sunday Mass. That's a sin against God?
Yes, it is when done deliberately. If people are sick, there are different legitimate excuses. They can be dispensed, but when you deliberately miss Mass, yes, it's gravely wrong. Now, again, we can talk about the three components: complete consent, sufficient reflection, or full knowledge.
Yeah.
But I think there are people who have not been going to participating, I like to say participating versus attending Mass, because we're called to have full conscious active participation, that if you haven't been going, I encourage you to go to confession and to, before you then receive communion anew. I can't subjectively evaluate any one person who's been missing Sunday Mass, but always err on the side of caution. We know that we're supposed to participate in Sunday Mass. We don't necessarily have to receive communion each and every time, but we know that we're supposed to participate in Sunday Mass.
I feel like that we have to be this one, and you may disagree with me. This is a sensitive one because some people are scrupulous about it, and even if they're sick, they'll go. Or even if there's a legitimate reason, like someone else in the family is sick, they'll
if
go.
someone has a lax conscience, they need to be addressed. They're erring on the side of sin. For someone who's scrupulous, it's a neuroses, and they don't want to do something and ironically put someone else's health at risk. If you're sick, you are excused and you should stay away because you could commit the transgression of getting someone else sick by virtue of your attempt to be.
But there's lots of people who are sick, for example, they don't have a communicable disease.
Okay.
They have some other thing that makes it. And I've known these people. They call the show, and it's like, I feel so guilty that I'm missing Mass. It's like, well, you do have a broken hip.
Yes, exactly.
You're not going to get anybody sick.
They can receive communion. Yeah, it's like I can understand and appreciate and encourage that people have a zeal to encounter our sacramental Lord in the context of the sacrifice of the Mass, but don't give yourself a hard time. Yes, but take advantage of the sacraments, have someone come over. But if you haven't been participating in Sunday Mass, please go to confession before you receive anew. And look, don't let any person be an obstacle to you and Jesus. Whoever it is, whatever Catholic role model, father, mother, brother, teacher, priest, bishop, whoever, don't let them keep you from our merciful Lord Jesus. And this is where I encourage our priest friends, ministerial priests, as opposed to all of us being in the priesthood of the faithful, that I encourage our ministerial priest friends to make available confession to help reconcile people. I think it really helps men when they have to give an account of themselves. It could be a transformative experience.
Yeah. All right, so the last sin against God that we're going to cover, we covered idolatry, blasphemy, missing Mass, occult practices.
Yes, you've interviewed.
What's an occult practice?
Well, that's where you're interacting with spirits apart from the communion of God. Be they, you might be thinking you're trying to do a seance, for example, trying to get hidden knowledge, divination. I've spoken about in Catechism 21:15 to 21:17. And I say apart from the communion of God, that is apart from the saints. People need to realize that praying to saints is not praying to dead people. It's praying to people who are friends of God who intercede for us. In this other case, we're trying to, with the occult, we're trying to tame powers. We're trying to, for our own purposes, trying to get knowledge of hidden things or future things. And in the process, what we end up doing is opening ourselves up to spirits. We know the movie The Exorcist, where they were the child, based on a real life story, where a Lutheran child was messing with a Ouija board, which he had gotten from his aunt, God have mercy on her soul. These are things not to be played with. As I say, you dance with the devil, you will get dipped, and you will get dipped hard. And I think you've discussed, if I recall correctly, you've interviewed exorcists. We've seen an increase of exorcists in the church, and I think we're going to see an increasing amount, because people, you mentioned going to Sweden and Thor and whoever else out in the wilderness. We're made in God's image and likeness, and we end up seeking God and love in all the wrong places. And so I think we're going to see an increasing amount of this, where people are going to need spiritual prayer, maybe not full exorcisms.
Do you think that we're seeing more like demonic stuff. Like the church is just so much more open about this stuff than it was, say, when we were kids. It's common to talk about it. People are more familiar with. Do you think the fact that we're seeing more of this, I don't know what you would call it, maybe openness to demons or activity of demons. I don't know how to speak about it, but you understand what I mean. It has to do with the fact that people are doing things that are putting themselves in danger, or that people no longer are doing the things that get them out of danger. Like people are practicing the faith less.
Yes,
and there's actual blessings and tools that come with the life and the practice of the faith.
Precisely, and if you aren't, the sacraments are a great insulation from that. In the old days, you mentioned we were kids. We were like, 10, 12, roughly, when The Exorcist came out. It scared a lot of people. People had more faith in. A lot of people these days are thinking, no, it's not a big deal. And they go into areas because they are made in God's image. Like you say, all this Dawn of the Dead and the zombie movies, it's like we don't want this life to be the last thing. We have this desire for something more, and people are looking in the wrong places, and they are finding out the hard way that, yes, there is a demonic world, yes, there is a spiritual world, and you need to stay away from it or you're going to get into real trouble. And as exorcists have commented, sometimes it's tougher these days because you're dealing with non-Catholics or non-practicing Catholics who don't have access to the full, particularly the Eucharistic confession.
Right.
So God help us.
Well, like parents aren't even baptizing their children in many cases. Baptism is a powerful sacrament.
It is, and it's, let the children come to me, Matthew 18, verses 1-4, and that all begins with the sacrament of baptism. Our Lord is, it's the analog, new covenant to the circumcision, which was received on the 8th day by boys. And I can attest to it, I think you can too, that we felt an attraction to God and the grace, not simply because of our blessed parents, but because this is the grace of the sacrament. We're drawing us to him, and here we are today.
Yeah. All right, so we've covered 4 sins against God. We're going to move into sins against others. But the 4, just to review, sins against God: idolatry, worshiping or putting in the place of God something that does not belong there; blasphemy, a failure to love God properly, show proper respect to holy things and to God Himself, and maybe I should say, and particularly to the person of Jesus, who I honestly, I think if you took out everything on Netflix that includes some blasphemous use of the name of Jesus, you'd have about maybe a third of Netflix would be left. I mean, it's just everywhere, this blasphemous spirit we have. We think we're so funny. It's not funny. No. Missing Mass and then occult practices. Those are direct sins against God. Let's talk about sins against others. What are mortal sins against other people? Because I know that I sin against other people all the time, mostly when I'm behind the wheel of my car. But I'm really working on that, Tom. I'm working on that one.
You're kind of a happy guy, so I would think it's hard for me to think that.
Jerk with a capital J, Tom, when I'm driving. I mean, a capital J.
Well, I would say, murder is one that comes up, and murder is the unjust killing of someone, be it an individual or, God forbid, deliberately targeting a civilian population, such as dropping the atom bomb. We've discussed that before. On a civilian population as opposed to a military one.
Well, this is something, just to be clear with people, like there is murder in the context of war. War making itself is not
killing,
murder.
Yeah,
but
killing.
There's lots of killing. No, that's not what I'm saying, Tom. I'm saying there's murder in the context of war. There's lots of killing in war, but you might say most of it is not murder. But if you intentionally shoot a civilian, if you shoot a prisoner, there's and soldiers know this stuff. They're trained in this stuff.
Yes.
So that you mentioned Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the direct attack on cities that are populated with, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of women and children who are non-combatants. That's murder in the context of war.
We can't do evil that good may come from.
Right. So murder. Why is murder wrong?
Well, it is taking the right to life of someone. God is sovereign over life and death, not ourselves. And we, in taking the right to life of someone, we basically nullify all of their rights because they no longer, at least here on earth, exist to live. And so we kill them. We're not just talking about hurting them where they can get better and live another day. We're not talking about putting them in jail for a week or whatever, or prison. We're talking about annihilating them, at least in terms of their earthly existence. So it is the worst thing in that regard. You're basically, it's a violation of the fundamental right to life.
In the Ten Commandments, does it say thou shalt not kill or thou shalt not murder?
Thou shalt not kill, but it's killing of the intentional type regarding, innocent people.
Right.
So the killing, it's the context is clear.
So that means, like, even in self-defense, I shouldn't kill unless that is the necessity. But for example, if I could defend myself by running away, I should run away.
Sure. Can be
which is my favorite way to fight, Tom. That is my favorite way to fight. I am so good at running away.
Run away.
Run away, run away.
Yes.
But do you see what I'm saying? Like,
yes. You want to avoid such things.
Okay.
If you can, yes. And we're not getting a whole capital punishment thing. Clearly the church is teaching against it in terms of application. It's not an intrinsic moral evil like abortion. But again,
what about waging unjust war, like invading Poland, like Hitler invading Poland?
Yeah, clearly that is gravely.
Murder?
Well, insofar it's gravely wrong because it would involve likely murder if you're invading them in a military exercise. There's going to be, and you're clearly trying to impose your will on them. Yeah, that would be gravely wrong, and it would probably include the grave wrongdoing of murder in the process.
I am amazed that the way you listed these, you listed murder, and then unjust war or war crimes.
Yes.
And then your third sin against others, without some intermediate level, is gossip. Is gossip really that serious, Tom? You put it up there with murder?
Well, it certainly is common, and it can be, whether it's detraction, speaking something true about a person, but of which no one has a right. It could potentially, I think it's the kind of, death by 1,000 cuts. Our colleague Drew Belsky talks about never underestimating gossip and how it can be a relationship killer of various sorts and how we can basically destroy the reputation of a person by continually doing it. And you see this very commonly in schools. We see it online writ large.
Right.
And people that will delight in other people, the schadenfreude, people delighting in people's sorrow,
humiliation,
exactly.
Yeah. Right.
And as well as being sad, we'll get into envy when people do well, certain people. So yeah, gossip is something I think we need to be mindful of. Now, it's one thing to talk about. You don't want to speaking of, you mentioned scrupulosity earlier. Having to vent to a friend about something that happened, that's one thing. But when and we can always have good-natured kidding around, and you excel at that with all the different apologists.
Is it good-natured, Tom? I hope so.
I would say so, yes.
Okay.
Because you otherwise there would be we'd be signing a petition.
We're back to the jerk with the capital J.
No, you're not. You have a way.
I return you to an earlier part of our conversation.
No, you have a way with You have a way with people, and also sometimes people don't know when you're kidding. That'd be more your children's.
I'm horrified sometimes that people don't know I'm kidding. It horrifies me.
Especially
you
with
say something really.
Your kids' friends. Is he serious? Yeah. But seriously, gossip, and you are, and I think you're very mindful about if you were to ever say something. First of all, I don't think you are a malicious person, and I think you're very mindful of how you interact with people. But having made a case for your candidacy potentially for sainthood one day,
please continue.
With gossip, the gossip has that, and it can be also falsehood. It could be calumny, right? So, denigrating people.
Yeah. The one that gets me is that the first one you said, not calumny, but
detraction.
Detraction, because I think people think they're being just when they detract others. And I'll tell you this, because in airports you hear a lot of conversations because people just talk loud near you. Yeah. And I was listening to this guy telling another guy about just how irresponsible someone else at work had been. And it was clear it was not necessary to tell this story. It was not necessary. Okay. It was, and I was thinking, it's all true. Everything he's saying, if I believed every word of it was true, and it sounded like it was true, and he was just bagging on somebody else at work, and the other guy's like, but I thought, that's detraction. Like you're
especially if the other guy didn't know it.
People think if it's true, then they can say it.
Yeah.
But just saying true things that are negative, it's
and
sometimes
people,
really awful.
And oftentimes in isolation, Z wouldn't be mortal sins, but they can have the cumulative effect because you can assassinate someone's character, or you can really put someone down. The whole bullying, cumulative effect of bullying and people being suicidal. So we just need to be very mindful. And also we need to forgive and to repent. Hey, I'm sorry I did that. And because I think it's by repenting that can open doors for reconciliation, as can someone else says, you treated me badly, but I forgive you.
Yeah.
And that can be disarming. And it's crucial, and we see it writ large on a higher level when you have countries and the whole thing of diplomacy and charity and avoiding or escalating armed conflict.
All right, we got Tom Nash. We got to take a quick break, Tom. We're talking about mortal sins in an attempt to be helpful here, because we get a lot of questions about this stuff. We've gone over sins against God. Now we're about halfway through sins against other people. We'll continue that with Tom Nash right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Support for Catholic Answers Live comes from the Graduate School of Theology at Christendom College. Deepen your understanding of the Catholic faith through live online graduate courses, taught with uncompromising fidelity to the Church's magisterium, from Christology and bioethics to Mariology and more. This summer, you can also attend the Institute for Liturgical Formation on campus. Begin your master's degree or earn a certificate at graduatetheology.com. That's graduatetheology.com.
He was a Jesuit, a cardinal, and a doctor of the Church.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Robert Bellarmine is honored for his immense contributions to theology, including helping to draft 2 important catechisms that defended church teachings during the Protestant Revolt. Pope Clement VIII named Bellarmine a cardinal because, as the Pope put it, Bellarmine had not his equal for learning.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Tom Nash is our guest, which is always fun for me. I like you, Tom. I'm so glad you're in the building with us.
Praise God. It's always
something really good to the building to have you here with us.
I have to be mindful because Luke Bender says we can get in trouble with songs, but
I'm
not going to sing a song, but to paraphrase or to cite the words of
careful.
Ain't nothing like the real thing. In other words, being there interpersonal.
Wait, you literally go into meetings where they go, "Don't do a song."
I didn't do a song. I did not do a song. I cited.
Just stay away from songs, and you're like, "I'll just paraphrase," and then you literally gave the lyric of the song.
I didn't sing it.
You've been to the meetings, Tom. You've been. Just stay away from songs. We're gonna get.
I was trying to affirm that
YouTube.
If I may cite our President Christopher Check, propinquity.
Yeah, that's right.
The password is propinquity, which means proximity, nearness.
Yeah.
And it's true. It's like relationships. Could you imagine the husband and wife, if they were on 2 different coasts? It's not going to be a great relationship.
This makes me think of a song by The Who. Will you sing a little bit of a song by The Who for me?
I
Tom,
will
please?
not do that because I'll get in trouble with.
You're already in trouble. Bender's going to bring you into his office. And he's
Bender.
gonna... All right. Sins against God we covered. We're talking about sins against others. Murder is a sin against others. I think most people know that, although now people don't realize that abortion and euthanasia are the sin of murder. And as you said, it's not that sometimes people's knowledge really is compromised. But taking the life of those who are vulnerable, we've turned what is repellent to God into a good in our society. We treat these things like they're goods, euthanasia and abortion, and they are not. We talked a little bit about war crimes and also clear-cut cases of attacking civilians in war. These are sins against others. Gossip, a very serious sin because it can destroy the reputation of another person. And what do you got if you ain't got your reputation? What about, give me a couple more sins against persons that I should not be committing.
Actually, since I mentioned as a relationship to gossip, that it's its own category, that is lying. And if we talk about, because I mentioned slander, and of course you could do it in the name of being truthful. But yeah, lying, slander, libel, that is otherwise known as lying. That is slander or libel is lying, and this can be gravely wrong, especially if you if someone were to give false testimony and lead to someone's conviction and even murder, a capital punishment.
What if you lied about somebody in order to win a political race? You defeated them politically, and you lied about them.
You've talked about them saying, you could say they had an affair, which that wasn't the case, but you got enough
What if you said someone didn't pay their taxes, and you knew that was not true?
Well, hopefully that's one could be checked on quickly and corrected. But yeah, if you say something that has plausibility, and plausibility meaning it's going to be difficult to refute, and you get a few other people, it's kind of like with Jesus. We got a few.
I feel like a lot of politicians are in trouble, Tom.
Well,
That's
yeah,
why I'm asking this question, because I feel like our
political
people just go, yeah, he lied, so what?
Yeah, now then we'd have to talk about the gradation, and some people, is he being or she being, the word I'm looking for, are they gilding the lily? Are they
right? Sure, all of which is probably part of politics. You try to make the other person look bad,
but
and yourself look good.
But you're right.
But if you lie about them, you've crossed the line.
Think of Quiz Show where they were lying. That was a serious.
It's a good movie, Quiz Show.
It was.
Let's not talk about movies, though.
Okay.
Eventually, if I talk about movies with you, we always end up talking about The Exorcist for an hour. So.
Well, that's not true, but we could talk about go back to Montgomery Clift and I Confess, and they had to lie. I mean, he was on trial, and
Right. That's right, yeah.
Montgomery Clift.
Great movie.
Handsome gentleman.
I Confess. All right, so lying that seriously harms another person is a mortal sin.
Yes.
You would say yes?
Yes, if it seriously harms them, no doubt about it.
What about thou shalt
Thou
not?
shalt not bear false witness is one of the top 10.
But thou shalt not steal. You haven't said stealing.
I haven't.
Is a mortal sin.
Yeah, and again, when it is a graver situation, as opposed to somebody who might grab something because they're hungry, right? That would be, you could obviously.
Are you talking about the classic 1920s movie example of the hobo who takes the apple pie off the windowsill?
I hadn't thought of that, and you told me we're not supposed to talk about movies, but go back to you.
Oh, darn, I did. I went right back to movies. So like the I don't think you're supposed to say hobo anymore, but in the 1920s they said hobo. I don't know what's wrong with the word hobo. Why is that? Everything's offensive.
It is the mascot at South Dakota State University,
They're
also known as the Jackrabbits. They have a monument to hobos, and I guess they were going across the country on the trains.
So it's the Great Depression.
Yeah,
the hobo, he's got his stick with his little bag at the end of the stick, and he's got no food, and there's an apple pie sitting out on the windowsill cooling, and he takes the apple pie. Is he going to hell for that?
I would not presume that, no. But if you're somebody who's in a Ponzi scheme and you take millions from people and liquidate their life savings, now we're talking pretty grave. Not that these, again, we mentioned God's mercy, all these things people can be forgiven, but don't do it to begin with so as to don't look for things. We're always looking for God in the wrong places or substituting God, power, sex, aggression, etc., money. Don't go there.
All right, so we've gone through the sins, the direct sins against God, the sins against others. We will get in the next hour into sexual sin and sins of the heart, which is, I actually want to spend a lot of time on that because I think a lot of us are just lying to ourselves about how serious it is to carry hatred or envy, or these other. You'll get into all of them, but we're just viciously hateful towards other people in our heart,
drinking
and we think
poison
that's
and
okay
hoping the other
with God.
person's going to be dead.
Yeah. All right. So we'll talk about sexual sins and sins of the heart in hour 2 with Tom Nash right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Tom Nash is our guest. Tom Nash, apologist here at Catholic Answers. We're talking about mortal sins. Tom Nash is our guest. And look, the reason we're talking about mortal sins is, look, we're not trying to dwell on the sins. We get questions about this all the time, about what constitutes mortal sin. How will I know if I'm in a state of mortal sin? We get it, on the one hand, dismissively. Sometimes people are like, oh, the Catholics with all your mortal sins. And we didn't talk with Tom the first hour about the biblical roots of this understanding of sin that is deadly. But we can talk about that if we want this hour. But then we get from the other side as well, from people who are maybe overly worried or focused or maybe even terrified by the idea of mortal sin. We have clear warnings, and we have clear gifts. In other words, to heal when these things happen, when we fall, when we come up short, when we don't make it, when we and even when we do evil. I don't want to just act like there are people who have been reconciled to God, who have, and this has happened all throughout history, who have done tremendous evil. I'll tell you right now. I'm going to just give you one of them. All right, and some people aren't going to like this, that this man was reconciled to God, but the commandant of Auschwitz, a concentration camp, a man who was a murderer, you just can't. I don't know the words to describe how evil that is. Became reconciled to God, made a confession, said he was sorry, and was executed as a member of the Catholic Church, as someone who had become reconciled to Christ. So I say that
Rudolf Hess.
Hus. Yeah. Hus. I don't know how to, because people get him confused with the other Rudolf Hess. But yeah, and so I say that because look, the terror of these things is, I think, sometimes an underestimation of what Jesus has already accomplished. In my case, he can't do it.
Stop it.
So, that's right. Stop it. You have to stop that when you have that sense.
God is working in your life.
God is working in your life, and he can do it. And so we went through the sins, direct sins against God: idolatry, blasphemy, missing mass, occult practices. We went through sins against others: murder, and unjust war or war crimes, gossip. Now, this is not everything, but these are the main things. Lying, gossip and lying about others, and then theft when it involves serious theft. When it involves theft, in other words, that can, it doesn't have to be $1 trillion that you stole. It could be a loaf of bread. If that loaf of bread was going to feed a child who otherwise is going to die, okay, that's mortally sinful. On the other hand, so it's not just the quantity, it's the consequence, in other words, that tells you about whether these are grave. So now we'll get into the ones everybody wants to know about. We'll talk about the sexual sins, and we will do so carefully, but also, if you have little ones, you might exercise some care and come back to us at another time, because we do have to talk quite clearly and openly about these. But let me start with this, Tom. People, I think in the modern world, we have been convinced that sexual sin just ain't no big deal. I mean, they're committing sexual sins on sitcoms every night on TV.
Yeah, it's ironic that that's the case, and yet we see in the last, we mentioned going back to our youth, and we can see the consequences of the normalizing of sin with the number of abortions, the increase in divorce, the increase of cohabitation and children born outside of wedlock, or born in they don't have they don't have a stable home that they grow up in. We see the degradation of our society, and then we've got the concomitant things of pornography and things like that with movies, and that just drags us all the way down. And can be that argument that you can implode from within, as opposed to worrying about being taken over by the Russians, as there was that fear in decades past. So
You're describing something that's
Soviets, I should say.
corrosive.
Yeah, it is
Sexual
corrosive.
sin is corrosive of our relationships.
Little by
of our
little by
society.
little,
Yeah.
and yet individual acts themselves can be gravely wrong. But if we look at marriage and what God created it to be, I think that's a good starting point to see why the other ones are all disorders from that.
All right, so how do we know that sexual sin is sin? Like if I go to the Bible, like I hear all the time, people be like, they don't mention this in the Bible. Like it's not even mentioned in the Bible. So how do I know that sexual sin is sin?
Well, we know that it's mentioned in Exodus 20. We mention it. We also made reference to the Ten Commandments in our earlier discussions in Matthew chapter 19, where he's talking to the rich young man in verses 16 to 26. Reiterating the commandments, and therefore in adultery, and it's not just adultery and covetousness, but the related sins that go into that. That people say, well, Jesus never mentioned sodomy in particular. Well, that wasn't even on the table because clearly it was adultery, and quite frankly, sodomy, and it wasn't just about people being promiscuous. It was as an intrinsic moral evil. It's very clear from Old Testament and New Testament, including Romans chapter 1, verses 18 to 32, that such is gravely wrong. Of course, there are heterosexual grave sins, and they are adultery and fornication and masturbation, also known as a solitary vice. But if we go...
sodomy.
No, exactly. I was saying
Yeah.
heterosexual. Yeah, it could be sodomy within the heterosexual context, yes.
Because, I say that because people are confused about that. They think
that is. There are various expressions of grave wrongdoing, and sometimes people can rationalize young people saying, "Well, everything but fornication," but you can engage in things short of fornication that can be gravely wrong.
All right, let's start defining some terms then. What is it? The Scripture clearly is against fornication. I think St. Paul most clearly, if I recall, in the New Testament. What is fornication and why is it sinful?
Yeah, well, God, we speak of the marital act, right? The two become one. And this is what the marital act, by its definition, by its name, is aptly described, because the two are to become one. It's the total giving of the husband and wife and being open to. Sometimes you hear the terms unitive and procreative. I prefer the love giving and the life giving. That the expression of love, and in the expression of love is ordered toward life, not necessarily, but open toward it. And if you thwart it through contraception, right, deliberately thwart it, then you are necessarily, to one extent or another, undermining that expression of love. Fornication is saying something with our body that we don't mean in our hearts. That is, I give to you totally myself. The fact of that procreation is a possibility, right?
Yeah.
Is an indication that there should be a committed relationship between the people participating. And of course, with contraception, that just makes it all the more into a recreational thing. So fornication is sexual intimacy, sexual intercourse between two unmarried people, unlike the marital act, where
and
there
that's
is
a grave sin.
That is gravely wrong. You are presuming to, again, it can be a form of idolatry too when people take it to try to rationalize it, because you're seeking this pleasure apart from God's created order. And when you do that, there are consequences not only for you, but for the people you are engaged with, as well as the people who may be procreated as a result of that. There's all reverberations.
So it seemed like you were accepting the kind of modern language about this, that, look, you're saying something with your body. The language of the body is the language of total self-giving in sexual intercourse. I give myself completely to you.
Yeah.
But you're not actually, if you're not married to the person, you're actually lying with your body. That's kind of how Pope John Paul talked about it.
Sure.
You accept that way of talking about fornication?
Yeah, I think it's a way that people can relate to. And it's not simply, this is something, I do with our bodies. No, we are bodily persons. We are body soul composites. And it's not like saying, I didn't hit you. No, if you punch me in the face, you hit me, right?
Yeah.
Not that you in particular, but it's
no.
We we can't act like our bodies are some
Say,
appendages.
I didn't mean it, so it doesn't count. I didn't mean it. So that's what we're saying
We
about sex. I
express
think.
ourselves, our personhood, our identities, our personalities through bodily expression, our choices, acts of the will that are expressed because we are bodily persons. And so this is, as you say, people can say, oh, this isn't a sin. Well, we can see the multiplier effect of all the social breakdown. And then, unfortunately, we have a lot of, in the school systems, who will try through sex education say, oh, this is okay, this is fine. And I like to say with Planned Parenthood, we won't have children and we'll raise yours at your expense, literally, figuratively, truly.
Yeah, that's what has happened. A bit this sexual selfishness that we have engaged in does end up in a society that's not having babies.
Yeah, and what we've seen as well is an increase. So we've got adultery, which would be expands it because it's not just two unmarried people, but now you've got a husband and a wife. That's one that most people seem to get and to say, yeah, that's wrong. In a recent survey that came out, that is the one because it hits close to home, isn't it? And not surprisingly, hey, wait a second, we thought we were committed. Well, what's wrong with a little recreation, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of nonsense. So yeah, so you got fornication, you've got adultery, you've got.
Well, I have to take a break. So I just wanted to get fornication in the definition down and be clear where we're starting. You start with a very positive thing that God has made this act for the total self-giving to each other and for an openness to children. And so that positive, beautiful image is where we say, okay, but when we fall short of that in these acts that don't do those, that don't allow for that total self-giving and for children, then we've moved into the area of sin because we're misusing what God has given us. So fornication is the first of those. It's more serious than our society lets on. We got that in. We've got that. Now I want to get to the other sexual sins when we come back right after this.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at Magnificat.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
We should pray because prayer is conversation with God, and conversation is the only way to build a relationship. We need that relationship with God. We should pray and talk with God about what's on our hearts, what's on our minds, what's active in our lives, the joys we have. We should share all of these with God. Prayer is conversation, and conversation is the only way to build a relationship with God. It's the most important relationship. All of our other relationships depend on this one.
Tom Nash, our guest, and we're taking the time to talk about an unpleasant subject in many ways, but I think it's a very important subject, and we do get incredible numbers of questions about, is this a mortal sin? Is that a mortal sin? Have I, committed a sin that God won't forgive, or all that stuff? Or why do you Catholics obsess about these things? So we're going through. One of the reasons we obsess, as people might say, about sexual sins is because of the goodness of what God has given us in the relationship between men and women. It's not because of those relations are bad. It's because of the exalted goodness of them. As a matter of fact, God uses the image of the marital act of marital relations as the image of his own love for us, for the human race, for his church. We're not adding on to the Bible. We're not exaggerating, things that were minor in the Bible. We're taking the great theme of the Bible and applying it. That's what we're doing when we're taking sexual sin seriously. Is we're taking the overarching theme of the Bible. In the beginning, it was man and woman. He created them, and then the whole thing ends in a wedding feast at the end. So this is the theme of the Bible. This is not a preoccupation outside of what God really cared about. What God really cared about is us. And this is central to our lives. So that's why we got into the conversation about what is fornication and why is it sinful. Let's go over some others, Tom. It's all adultery, I think, is easy to say it's a sin because God just said it's a sin. He said, thou shalt not commit adultery.
Yes, and going to your point about the Bible, these are sins that are, through the natural moral law, we all recognize. There was Margaret Mead, the 20th century sociologist who went to Samoa and reported how they were, quote unquote, sexually free with fornication or adultery, whatnot. And yet it was all fabricated thing, which was kind of a rationalization on her part. To
Social
justify,
science that was fabricated? I
yes,
can't believe
and justify
it,
her
Tom.
own, sadly, lesbian lifestyle. But these are things that you look, the natural moral law and the family, even if you've got polygamy, these are recognized, which shows the law of God written on our heart. These go across cultures.
I can give you some evidence of that. They just did a recent survey, and I'm going to forget who it, but people can look it up, about what, there was actually a lot of reporting on it, so you can find this. What do Americans disapprove of all, whether you're religious or not religious? The number one thing that Americans disapprove of morally, by far, adultery.
Yeah, that's
everybody
the one
knows
I was
it's
making
wrong.
reference to that.
Everybody knows
I
it's
remember
wrong.
We saw the same survey.
Yeah.
Yep, because it hits close to home. Exactly.
Yeah, because you know that it involves deception, lying,
selfishness.
Like you can just see that's not fair to have someone
it's
make a vow
contrary
to you.
a commitment. Yes,
Yeah, right.
And selfishness is great until it hits home.
Yeah, and adultery hits home. So everybody knows adultery is wrong. Like as you said, that hasn't diminished its popularity, but. There we go.
Yeah.
But if we so is pornography adultery? You know, for say a married man who
well, our Lord, going back to Scripture, what did He say? If you look
Yeah.
upon a woman with lust, you have committed adultery or fornication, for that matter, in your heart. And certainly that can happen with pornography, especially with deliberately exposing, no pun intended, yourself to that. And pornography, I love how the Catechism sums it up, Si. Pornography consists in removing real or simulated sexual acts from the intimacy of the partners in order to display them deliberately to third parties. It offends against chastity because it perverts the conjugal act, the intimate giving of spouses to each other. It does grave injury to the dignity of its participants, actors, vendors, like for sale, the public, since each one becomes an object of base pleasure and illicit profit for others. It immerses all who are involved in the illusion of a fantasy world. It is a grave offense. Civil authorities should prevent the production and distribution of pornographic materials. I agree.
I agree with all of that.
I would revise our obscenity laws in that light, but that's another discussion.
Courts have been foolish in the United States. I don't know how it is around the world, but in the United States, we treat this as a First Amendment issue, as if dirty pictures was what the founders of the Constitution
Yeah, there's a difference
meant.
between nudes that are, statues versus, photographs of real people, and even more so movies.
Okay, so what we don't say, I at least often you don't hear people say people look at pornography. They say people use pornography, and that gives you an insight into what it is. It's a thing that's designed to stimulate a pleasure response in us.
Yeah.
We're not, we're not reading pornography like you read a book. You're using pornography to create a biological effect in yourself.
Yeah, and in the process, we've seen, because of human trafficking, which has become much worse, that we've gotten people that have been procured into doing these movies against their will. So it extends the related thing of rape. Just gravely, gravely wrong. What's been going on, how pornography has become a scourge on our country, and now much more easily available because of the anonymity, the accessibility, and affordability.
It's so shocking when you think about what children are exposed to on the internet.
And I fear that many people, because I've priests have spoken about it generally, that this is oftentimes men's conferences, shall we say, not an infrequent sin that's confessed, and there is a tremendous rationalization that men will apply. Well, I'm not committing adultery. I'm not committing fornication. Well,
but that's not what Jesus said.
No, it's not. And clearly you are enslaving yourself. Vice breeds vice. Virtue breeds virtue. Chastity is a virtue where you have self-control and you can respect a person. This is where we are reminded that we are to give a witness so that women, will have role models and expect more from the people they date, the people they marry, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so pornography is related to, look, I don't use the term self-abuse because I, as a child, when priests would talk and said self-abuse, like they would say, when the priest was leading you through, here's how you do an examination of conscience. I honestly didn't know what he was talking about. And
it's a truism, but it needs
like
explanation.
Sometimes you just need to say. So let's use the term solitary
vice,
sexual sin.
Yeah, or solitary vice.
Why is that sinful? What's wrong?
We mentioned about that we are created to give a gift of ourselves, and that we who are bodily beings, that we are to, the love-giving and life-giving expressions of the marital act. We are to be outward. Love is outward, not, turning inward. Yes, we love ourselves, but masturbation is turning inward, and to misuse the sexual act, to misuse the gift of sexuality in a way that, idolizes ourselves to one extent or another, that really turns us inward and not instead of outward in terms of the gift.
Yeah.
That we are definitely, it is a form of lust. It's often associated with pornography or impure thoughts, right? Because, the whole thing of fantasy, misguided meditation, if you will. And so when we are turned inward in the process, we are, you were using, as it says in the Catechism, the sexual faculty for whatever reason outside of marriage is essentially contrary to its purpose. We could see that you mentioned fornication, but all the more so, not all the more so because it's solitary, but it's still gravely wrong, and it's going to affect us and how we interact with people. And we see this I've seen people who've got married and, so-and-so didn't realize so-and-so had a pornography, masturbation problem, and that had to be worked through.
However, there are, I got to be careful how I speak about this, but the youth, for example, or psychological disturbance or I think even it says habit. I'm trying to remember what it says in but so we have to be careful not to leave people without hope on this one.
No, it says here to form an equitable judgment about the subject. This is 2352 of the Catechism. To form an equitable judgment about the subject's moral responsibility, guide pastoral action, one must take into account the affective immaturity, force of acquired habit, conditions of anxiety, or other psychological and social factors that can lessen, if not even reduce to a minimum, moral culpability. At the same time, if someone engages, I think it's good as a part of practice, if one engages in the sin of masturbation, to go to confession before one receives communion. Now, if you talk, I think that encourages the person all the more so to grow in chastity, erring on the side of caution, and it as well, people say, hey, why did so-and-so not go to communion today? Well, that's where we need to avoid the sin of gossip and to not be looking at the communion line as an evaluation of where everyone is at with God and how we're doing versus them kind of garbage.
Okay. So here, this is one where the world thinks we are absolutely insane. And I think that that's not bad. We are not made for the world. We're made for God.
And in the process,
this is a sin that can be overcome even when people are in a grave, a persistent habit, and freedom from this, as so many people are testifying now in their, talking on Matt Fradd's podcast or whatever.
Yes.
Freedom from this really is a spiritual freedom, and I think people should have hope.
We were made for more, we were made for better, and these things, we become enslaved in vice instead of free.
More Sins with Tom Nash right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Have you ever wondered about the mysterious, even obscure aspects of the Catholic faith? Dive into the Jimmy Akin podcast, where Jimmy brings together information from many fields as he pushes the boundaries of apologetics. Tune in today to the Jimmy Akin podcast, Mysteries of the Faith, a highly entertaining, informative, and at times humorous show that will help you grow in your faith. Visit JimmyAkinPodcast.com today to subscribe.
Lots of people have big questions about Catholicism. It needs a big book of answers, and now it's got one. The Big Book of Catholic Answers is filled with helpful replies to more than 250 questions about the faith. Questions about God, salvation history, the Creed, the Bible, the list goes on and on. Order your copy of the Big Book of Catholic Answers today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. We're talking about mortal sins. Because we need to have these conversations every now and then. We get a lot of questions about these, and sometimes we get accusations about these. Why is the church so obsessed with this or that? We talked about sins against God, idolatry, blasphemy, missing Mass, occult practices. This is not a comprehensive list. This is a list of major ones to consider. Sins against others, murder and war crimes and gossip and lying that does serious harm, and theft also that does serious harm. All of these can. If we do them with the consent of the will and full knowledge, be mortal sins. These can be condemnatory of us. We have to avoid these, and we need to confess them and overcome them when they are part of our lives, and we have done them. Not saying that in the spirit of condemnation, but in the spirit of always remembering we need to keep turning back to God's mercy on these things. And no one yet has exhausted God's mercy. It hasn't happened yet. I know you probably think you tried, but no one's done it yet. So it'd be like saying somebody's, used up the whole ocean or something. But then we got into sexual sins. We talked about fornication, adultery, pornography, masturbation, human trafficking. I want to ask you about two more sexual sins that I think these are the ones that really, really make us Catholics unpopular. The fact that we list these among not just sexual sins, but among the grave sexual sins. And you can take them in whichever order you want, but this is going to be the low point of the show for our popularity, because people don't like us because we say homosexual acts are gravely sinful and contraception is gravely sinful. Take it in whatever order you want.
Yeah, well, homosexual acts, sodomy, and in particular when we see the expression between two men, we could see the absence of complementarity, whereas the marital act, an openness to life, even with people who are sterile or are in their later years, you see the complementarity between husband and wife. There are natural processes, which we don't need to detail, that if a woman who's a healthy woman, there are processes that facilitate the marital act. Whereas with regard to sodomy, quite frankly, it's injurious to a person's backside. And it is clearly, there is no giving and receiving. There is no complementarity. There is no love-giving and life-giving aspects to it. And we talked off air about Gore Vidal, the famous writer, openly homosexual, who said that he had found, and what an admission and acknowledgement on his part, that with his longtime partner, a key part of their staying together was not engaging in sodomy, and that engaging in sodomy was a deterrent to
long-term
communion and relationship with people. Yes, and I thought, wow, what does that say? I mean, people say, well, look at Mary and Joseph. They didn't have, but this was a Josephite marriage. They were totally giving, and they were not. And they didn't seek things, God forbid, blasphemy on the side. Whereas these homosexual couples are frequently doing that, and it just says something that when you try to romanticize it, right? It doesn't mean that two men can't be very good friends and brothers, hopefully brothers in Christ. But when you try to add a romantic component to it, we clearly see, and that sodomy itself as an action, it is an invalid expression of love. There's no two way about it. To whatever people might think, it is a perversion, it is unnatural, it is contrary to the moral order, and this is not to get on. And this is to talk about the people.
Relationships.
No, it doesn't facilitate. And Gore Vidal said it. I spoke to somebody recently, same situation, that they had been with somebody 45 years. They got permission to pursue things on the side, but they had never engaged. I said, what does that tell you about that? You and your friend have been together 45 years, but you've never engaged in sodomy. Doesn't that tell you that sodomy is not a unitive
It doesn't bring people together.
It doesn't bring people together. It breaks them apart. So there we have those examples. Contraception, in some ways, contraception opens the door to homosexuality. Why? Because it talks about recreation. And if it's just about recreation or expression or pleasure, right, because we've totally thwarted openness to the procreative aspect, then, hey, that opens the door to other forms of sexual pleasure. And I might choose to do it this other way. Now, I do believe that contraception, as one priest I remember celebrating back in 1988, Jeffrey Radigero, it was a Ukrainian Rite priest, and he talked about, and I do believe this is true, that I think it's more self-evidently wrong that pornography is wrong versus contraception. People don't get that, hey, we're married, what's wrong? But you fail to see, I've talked to many women who are married, and with contraception, you oftentimes see that, oh, wait a minute, contraception, you got to be on call because,
Oh, that it turns the married relationship, even though you might have a married relationship with children, when you're contracepting,
it objectifies the wife. You're on call. It's not appreciating her in her totality or femininity.
It's also often using chemicals that
not good for the body.
It seems like
Janet Smith has done a great job. Dr. Janet Smith, God bless her, retired of Sacred Heart Seminary in Detroit, has done a great job of pointing out all the side effects, and they are long and they are not good for you. Weight gain, etc., depression, they are side effects to this treating what isn't a medical problem, that is fertility. So yeah, contraception, even if people might not self-evidently see it, it's still wrong and it causes problems. And of course, contraception, whether in marriage or outside of marriage, not good and it facilitates, shall we say, was the fuel, the gasoline on the fire of the sexual revolution.
And the sexual revolution, if you look at it objectively, as far as the happiness of women, the happiness of men, the health of children, it has been a disaster.
Yeah.
And people, we lie to ourselves about that. We say it's been a great liberation. No, it has not. It has been a cultural, civilization-wide disaster. All right, we've covered then the major sexual sins: fornication, adultery, pornography, masturbation, human trafficking, which involves other sins as well, homosexual acts, and contraception. Let's get into the heart of people, because I'll tell you what, Tom, I think a lot of us are envious or hateful, and we don't even really quite realize that we are.
Yeah,
that I think our own hearts are hidden from us in some way.
And in some ways too, we talk about covetousness, because that is a dovetail continuation showing how internally, with lust, that coveting one's wife, coveting somebody else, committing adultery in your heart. These are things that what we do disfigure us, and they affect how we live and how we interact with people.
Well, let me push back on that a little bit, because
okay.
I'm remembering, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of Dennis Prager's debate with Matt Fradd about pornography. And Prager's point was, what does it matter what's going on in my heart? What matters is how I treat other people and whether I give God what I'm supposed to give God, what does it matter whether I'm having? I mean, in this case, it was basically having impure thoughts or looking at pornography. What is it? So what about because I think a lot of people might look at it this way that like.
You will inevitably
I
objectify.
never act on my hatred. I never act on my hatred of a certain kind of people or of, I really hate those people. But why is that sinful?
Let's go back to Dennis Prager's specific example. And I would say, Dennis, whether you or for other people, it affects particularly the women that are in your life, one way or another. You objectify them. The women you date, the women you don't date, the wife you have, inevitably... pornography, as Matt Fradd argued so well, and we've said otherwise in our discussion in complementarity and in confirmation of that, it objectifies the individual who is lusting. It also objectifies the recipient. There's no doubt about that how we are acting, our interior life shapes who we are in our outward expression. And that can be with hatred, like you mentioned, hatred or other things like that. If we hate somebody, it's bad for our health. As the old saying goes, drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. That these vices are bad for our health.
But I can't control my emotions. That's the other side thing people are going to say.
True. It's one thing, but how do we deal with our anger? Do we respond to it with meekness, or do we lash out? Do we hold a grudge? Do we ruminate? Do we meditate and nourish that grudge?
Yes, all of those things. I'm sorry to say, Tom.
Well,
but that's working on it, but I'm finding myself answering yes to all of those
things. We have to
things.
catch ourselves.
Yeah, right.
And otherwise, like there could be other things like if we don't, we might think, hey, like the rich fool, the parable of the rich fool in the Gospel of Luke, where we think I can go my own way, and God is, but of course, as the Lord says, you fool, your life will be required of you this night. What then will you do of all these grain bins, etc., that you've accumulated? So that we could be presumption. It can lead to the sin that's against hope, presumption. You mentioned about God, you can't exhaust God's mercy. No, we can't, but we can definitively self-exclude ourselves, which is what hell is. And of course, we want to let people know that as long as they have breath, there is God's mercy. And so to always turn back, and not to commit the sin of presumption against hope or commit the sin against despair.
Well, let's go through some of the sins of the heart by name.
Okay.
But I do think I have to take a break, Tom.
Okay.
So we'll go through them after we do the break. But I think you said a word that is at the root of a lot of people's problem with mortal sin, and that word is hell. That I don't know. Again, we talked about homosexuality and contraception. If you start talking about hell, we are going to be the most unpopular people on earth. Boy, talk about an unpopular idea. So when we're talking about mortal sin, I think the reason people don't like it is we're talking about a spiritual death. That if you persist in that spiritual death, until your own physical death, you will not see the face of God. You will be eternally excluded from the household of God. Nobody likes that, Tom. So I'm going to make you justify that and go through the sins of the heart that can keep me out of heaven right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and His gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more. Alexian Brothers is a proud sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. For 800 years, these Catholic brothers have offered a prophetic and daring response to the gospel, serving Christ in the sick, the poor, and the dying. Is God calling you to be a courageous disciple? If you feel called to total self-giving as a religious brother in the mission of Jesus, call our vocations office at 847-264-8703. That's 847-264-8703. AlexianBrothers.org.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
I told him about the woman who came to me and said her two children hadn't spoken to each other for 2 years. Their grandma died, and she was very wealthy. She left half to each one. She said they're arguing over a commode. She said it's inlaid. Can you imagine being in hell and somebody saying to you, what are you here for?
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Welcome back. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Tom Nash, our guest. Thanks for being here for 2 whole hours, Tom.
Good
Thanks
to be
for
here,
doing this
man.
for 2
Good to
whole
be
hours.
here.
This is it's probably time off purgatory for you. Does it work that way? Like, if you have to suffer through an insufferable host for 2 hours, do you get some time off purgatory?
I'd like to think it's by doing a good deed in
That's what I'm saying.
collaboration with you.
Oh, okay.
That we are.
You always turn everything positive, Tom.
It's a good habit.
Except when you just in the middle of conversation shout out things like "we're all going to die," and I don't know why you said it.
That was off air, and
let's not get into it. I want to get into
but it goes with that we all have to have an account. There's
yeah. All right, so justify hell to me real quickly. I know we've done it a million times, and it is something people call and ask for. Like, how can a loving God send people to hell? I think the maybe if you reword the question to be, how can a loving God tolerating people refusing him? Then it becomes a little easier to understand.
Yes.
But when we're talking about mortal sin, we are talking about sin that can get you into hell.
Yes, if not repented of. And again, mercy,
Sure.
God's mercy, and let's not put ourselves beyond God's mercy. Good people out there in the listening audience, that God is always there. But yeah, these things exclude us because they are gravely wrong. We have, to one way or another, put something. They are expressions of idolatry, where we put my will be done over thy will be done. And as the Catechism says so well in 1033, to die in mortal sin without repenting and accepting God's merciful love means remaining separated from him forever by our own free choice. This state of definitive self-exclusion from communion with God and the blessed is called hell.
Yeah.
And people don't want to hear it, but it's in the end, people want a third choice. Okay, I don't want hell.
That's right.
But we don't want heaven, because then, and so do we have trust in God? It's like, well, these are the choices, and are we going to become childlike, Matthew 18 verses 1-4, or are we going to do it our way and say, if this is heaven, to hell with it? It's not a good call.
No. And
so it's our choice. And there is no happiness in hell, and yet they're not longing for heaven because they made their choice. It's the will has been fixed. We have this is our choice to make, and God gives us the opportunity many times in His mercy to turn to Him, and because heaven would be, it's sometimes it's like. Itself would be a hell to people, right? Because this means repenting. This means
letting go of the thing.
Letting go, yeah. This is
refuse to let go of it.
You have refused to detach that which you've made an idol, and so God's presence in heaven becomes hell to you, sadly. And oftentimes people talk, well, what is hell? It's like, well, it's like inevitably you're not in communion with God. And because you have seen God as such an adversary, that this is true hell, because you have rejected that which is your fulfillment.
Yeah.
And so, the suffering is, people talk about, could that be God's, the burning love of God, and yet they hate it. People, as one description of hell. But the bottom line is, what is hell? It's the definitive self-exclusion of man of definitive self-exclusion from communion with God and the blessed.
Okay, so when we're talking about sins of the heart, then interior sins
Yes.
that I have within me, not acts that I'm outwardly committing, but acts of the will and of the intellect. So let's say, let me give you a scenario. Somebody has been badly hurt by another person. Okay?
Yes.
Think of some horrible, evil act was committed against them.
Yep.
And the person says, I can't forgive it. So what does that person need to do to get into heaven? Do they have to let go of all their anger?
Our Lord says, if you have not forgiven men's sins, neither will my Father in heaven forgive yours. We see this in Matthew 6.
But that's what I'm asking. What does it mean to forgive in that?
Well, it means it's to let go of the pain. It's also to let go of the power you have given them over your life. It's to recognize that God is merciful, that this is not going to define who you are. It's a freeing forgiveness.
Do I have to go to Thanksgiving dinner with them?
No, it does not mean you need to have a relationship with them. It does not mean that you need to be friends with them, etc. But it does mean that you need to forgive them and ultimately to wish them well, which is heaven. Now, it might involve a severe mercy, quite frankly, which would involve prison for somebody who's done something gravely wrong. Or something else. So it doesn't mean someone is off the hook. It doesn't excuse their wrongdoing and saying, oh, no big deal. It recognizes but that's why you are forgiving them precisely because you recognize they've done something
What if I
gravely
said
wrong.
to God, look, God, I'm emotionally stuck on this, but just because I know it's what you want,
We need to be healed.
I pray for that person to go to heaven.
We can't be in heaven if we are not in union with God and all those. And this is why we are detached from not only our idolatrous attachments, but detached from nursing grudges, nursing hurts, nursing resentments.
What about envy? Why is envy a grave sin? Like what I can see, okay, a hatred, an unwillingness to forgive. I can see that as a kind of violence against the other person, which I'm really committing against myself, but it's a disposition of violence towards the other person. Why is envy? Like, I wish I had everything Elon Musk has. He's got so much stuff. I don't even have one private jet.
Well,
and he's got a bunch of private jets. I don't have any.
That could be
zero.
That could be covetousness.
No private jet. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, but jealousy is distinguished from
on
yes. Jealousy is distinguished from envy, and going back to 6 degrees from Pope Leo XIV, we're going to quote Augustine. But before we quote the great Saint Augustine, envy is a capital sin, Catechism 2539. It refers to the sadness at the sight of another's goods. And so it's not just saying, oh, wow, I wish I had what Elon Musk has.
Okay. It's okay to kind of wish, like, people, I wish I had.
And the immoderate desire to acquire for them for oneself, even unjustly, when it wishes grave harm to a neighbor, it is a mortal sin. And this is the beautiful thing where St. Augustine says, St. Augustine saw envy as the diabolical sin. From envy are born hatred, detraction, calumny. We're hitting on things we've talked about earlier. Joy caused by the misfortunes of a neighbor, Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
Good German word. And displeasure caused by his prosperity. In other words, we don't rejoice like the person who, when they found their lost coin, and I think it's Luke 15, we are saddened at their prosperity. And gratitude is crucial in this matter, and also, true charity and rejoicing in what other people have, and the gifts that they have, and not being envious. Envy is a killer in various ways, as we just documented.
That thing that Augustine said about envy being at the root of all of these things it sounds like René Girard to me, that his whole thing about we desire and we imitate other people's desires, and then we start to envy, and then we start to be violent towards those who we see as the problem of us not getting what we wanted.
If we're emulating people's desires and acting like them, and we're getting them, clearly what they're doing is not good for us, versus if we're emulating the saints, it's going to lead to true freedom. And think about this: internal dispositions, poverty, chastity, and obedience. What a what a response to the world where we think about poverty, riches, obedience versus power, and chastity with sex. These are like the big three of you. You're rejecting those, and you still got happiness.
Yeah.
What gives? Well, there's a God whose image and likeness. That interior life, and this talks about the sins of the heart. If we get that right, that interior life, it's going to transform us. And easier said than done, but that's why we have to draw near to the Lord and be little children.
Because he himself is meek and humble of heart.
Yes,
childlike,
childlike, not
easier
childish.
when you know that he's not asking something of us that
And
is not
think
true of
about
him.
his example about he could have called down legions of angels to destroy himself, and yet he didn't. He didn't say, "Hey, Father, forgive them," except for those Pharisees. Doggone it! I'm really upset at Caiaphas. Thought he,
Yeah, that's
for
a
the
good
sake of the
point.
state. That Jesus models meekness. He models forgiveness. And so it is fitting, his death is fitting in terms of how he died to show the ugliness of sin and also that God's mercy triumphs over sin.
Why you talked about presumption of God's mercy as one of the dispositions of the heart. That's a problem. Hatred, covetousness, envy, presumption of God's mercy. But you have on the list despair of God's mercy.
Yeah.
Why is it a grave sin to despair of God's mercy?
Well, I like to say that despair is the flip side of pride. That when we think we're beyond God's forgiveness, we can't be forgiven. We've done something too much, and that we believe that God is somehow against us, or that God can't forgive us, or that life is not worth living. Again, suicide is gravely wrong objectively. We don't presume to judge in any particular case,
Right, yes.
but we commend people's souls to God's mercy, and yet we also want to encourage people that there is hope, that there is...
Well, sometimes there's a kind of bravado of despair, of like, I'm going to hell anyways, like that's a kind of presumption of...
Yeah, if someone's, but that's in some sense saying like, I don't want anything to do with you, God. If that means being childlike,
see, yeah, right.
Then thank you, no thank you. And it's like, again, it's like, if that is heaven, to hell with it. As I say in one of our Q&As, it's a terrible thought, but this is what the devil and his minions said originally. If this is heaven, to hell with it. And this is where pride is the worst of all sins, and how if we become childlike, easier said than done, especially as we become adults and have responsibilities of various sorts, becoming childlike versus childish is the key to the life of Christ.
What do you do if you've committed a mortal sin or you are in the habit of a mortal sin? You've got 20 seconds.
Well, you need to repent, get to confession as soon as possible, repent to the Lord, say, Lord, forgive me, I have failed, and realize that God, who is bound by the sacraments, is not himself, who bound salvation to the sacraments is not himself bound by the sacraments. So we never give up hope for any person, and therefore to seek God's mercy, preferably in confession, but keep praying for them otherwise.
Yeah, people think that this is like a modern innovation of the church. The church has always taught that even at the moment of death, if someone cries out to God for mercy, God will have mercy on them.
St. Faustina, the great one, he says, God beckons to each person 3 times at death. We don't want to be presuming on God's mercy, but we don't want to also despair of it.
Tom Nash has been our guest. That will do it for us. We didn't list every possible mortal sin, but we got the big ones. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers.